Welcome, listeners, to another episode of the Monsters Fresh podcast, where we explore the evolution and role of women and non-binary people in horror, as well as familiar tropes of the genre through a feminist lens. Hi, I'm Clelia, one of your podcast hosts.
Hi, I'm Meg, the other host of the podcast.
And in this series, we are turning our attention to witches and the portrayal of witchcraft in horror cinema around the world. And in each episode, we dissect one film we feel fits the bill particularly well. Today, we're peeling back the layers of a hauntingly unique film that blurs the line between reality and superstition. A tale that intertwines the surreal with the stark realities of societal belief, and will leave you questioning the very fabric of truth and myth. Our film is I Am Not a Witch from 2017, written and directed by Zambian Welsh filmmaker Rungano Nyoni.
Yes. So I had not seen this, although I think you've talked about it before. We've talked about it before, but I'd not seen it until we watched it. So I was very excited. So I'll do a little synopsis.
Yeah, get started with synopsis.
We'll just dive in. So a young girl's accused of witchcraft and sent to a government-run witch camp, and she's given the option to stay or leave and be turned into a goat. Choosing to stay, she's put to work with her fellow witches before Mr. Bander, a government official, sees an opportunity to exploit her for his own gain. And now she must decide if it is better to live in restraints or risk it all for freedom.
Ooh, that is a great synopsis. No, I love it. And I mean, obviously, it's not a usual kind of film. It's not a horror film. I'd say, I'd label it a social horror, to be honest. So I think it's interesting. And the reason why we've talked about it before, as you mentioned already, is because when we did the Hideous Film Insights film season in Nottingham last year, Nikki, our friend from the film programmer at Contemporary, mentioned it then, and that's how it came about, and that's why we watched it and thought it would be a good idea to include it in this season, because although it is kind of, very different from what we usually talk about, it kind of makes sense, I think, to include it in this season. So obviously we watched it separately, so I'm kind of interested to know what you thought of it.
Yeah.
First impressions?
Yeah, I mean, first impressions, I agree. I think there'd be a lot of people who would argue it's not a horror film, and it doesn't have the typical sort of a lot of the things we've seen in other films that we've covered this season. But I do think it is a social horror, and and because it is rooted in fact, in the reality for a lot of people, it's an important film to watch and to talk about, and I'm really glad to have had opportunity to watch it, and I would definitely watch it again for many reasons that we'll talk about. But I think, as a way to sort of tell this story that is so filled with, the harsh reality of people's lives and pain and all that stuff, the way that it's been done, like you were saying in your introduction, the way that it blurs sort of myth and reality and brings in ideas about, superstition and belief, I think it's a masterpiece, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's incredible to think it's this young filmmaker's, she's only 35, I think, first feature.
Incredible.
She's done a couple of shorts before that, but absolutely amazing. And I think it kind of has that amazing edge of like magical realism in some part of the film. And it's obviously a really dark satire of and grounded in reality, but also adding some elements that are complete fabrication, but kind of giving a really interesting picture. And obviously this whole season we've been interested in, the representation of the witch, and, it made sense to include that side of thing as well, because we really went for the, for the folk element, and, so the ritualistic element and how it's grounded in, how we affect people's lives daily in the modern world is a really interesting thing to talk about as well.
Yeah. And I think this does round out the season really well, because we have had films, that have looked at a particular time point for development, like in The Craft, we've seen like teenage witches, and then we've looked at that folk belief and around witch trials with a witch, and really with this, it's sort of tying that all together to show the reality of what it means to be accused.
Yes, exactly.
Of being a witch. And that was one of my first thoughts about it, actually, from opening at film, is that, in West, we've really reclaimed that title. And we've talked a lot about that, the way that women and feminism has reclaimed the witch as a label to be proud of in in a lot of ways, in a way that we would say quite offhand, the monstrous flesh witches, we would have no fear about saying that and framing ourselves in that way. But what this film does is remind us that in a lot of world, it's still so dangerous to be accused, to be labelled that way, and it's an important perspective that I think can be lost in this. Well, it's like we talk about in every season. If you only ever look at films or art from your cultural context, you're only ever going to see yourself reflected.
Exactly.
So it's important to look at films like this and see how, other cultures and other people, their lives, and where that filmmakers are telling them stories. I mean, to say it's a first feature, it's incredible. It's like Bulbul as well, though. That were a first feature, weren't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It just shows what happens when you give women opportunities. They make
the opportunity to tell their stories.
Incredible stories.
And I did what I found really interesting, and we'll talk about this more as we go along the film. But I think from the point of view of the filmmaker and that film in particular, I think what was really interesting is also taking the idea of not the idea, but Zambia and different tribes in Africa have matriarchal societies, but within those matriarchal societies there's inherent misogyny as well, and it kind of plays differently than the patriarchy, but it very much still exists. So I do commend her. Her courage for bringing this to to the public's attention as well. I think it's really interesting. She has her second feature. She's just made a second feature, which is produced by A24, called On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, and it's premiered at Cannes this year, and I'm kind of really excited to see it. And again, it's more on the horror side, so great for us, because we'll be able to to probably cover it on this podcast. But deals with sexual abuse, matriarchal societies, again, family secrets. So I love the fact that she's really interested in all those themes. I think he'll be explored in a very different way than it is in this film. But yeah, I think she's a fantastic voice. And definitely one to look out for.
Yeah, and that again, that idea of the idea that if we had a matriarchy instead of a patriarchy, that everything would be fine, but in reality, that's not the way it works unless you dismantle all the structure underneath.
That's exactly it. I've got a quote from her from an interview that I read about this, where she says, my tribe in Zambia is matriarchal, so I always get these questions at home about being a woman director, but never in Zambia. She means at home in Wales. Never in Zambia, because all the directors I know there are women, and it's not that they don't have misogyny there. It's just a different kind of misogynist society. It has ideas about how women should be and behave, but it's not a society that precludes women from working. So that it's just I just find it a fascinating thing to talk about, really.
Yeah, no, I think that is really interesting, and what an interesting perspective she'll have coming from, like you said, so she's getting one form of misogyny in Wales and in a Western context, and another form of misogyny in Zambia, and it's really interesting to see the way that plays itself out, and the so you're allowed to work, but you're still going to be policed,
exactly,
in other ways, and so you've got freedoms in one way, but restraints in another. And I think that idea about freedom and restraint is something that she's really exploring in this film, in really interesting ways and very beautiful ways that are different to what we see normally. I think in terms of a lot of films that you see that are exploring witchcraft. I mean, we've covered quite a diverse range of films on this series, but I don't think any of them have necessarily done what this film does. I think it's very unique in that way.
Great. So now we've sold it to people, hopefully. And we've justified, why it's ending the season with this. But just to say, if you haven't seen the film, this is a good time to pause the podcast and go and watch it so that we don't spoil it for you. If you're not bothered about spoilers, then do proceed.
Yes.
But on that note, let's deep dive the film. So the film opens in a bus driving on a dirt track. We have no context or exposition at all. Until the bus arrives at its destination, and we understand that the passengers are tourists, and they have arrived at a reserve in a remote and arid area. There we see women sitting behind a crudely put-up metal fence, white ribbon attached to their back and tied to the trees behind them with giant spools. Off-screen, a tourist asks, why are there ribbons attached to their backs? And the guy tells them in a very serious tone that is so that they don't fly away, because if they were given the opportunity, that's the first thing they would do. They would fly away and find people to kill. And to top off the surreal atmosphere of the scene, we get a tracking shot of the women behind the fence, half-heartedly making faces and speaking in tongue at the tourist. And all the while, Vivaldi's Forces in Violin Concerto is blasting over the images we are seeing.
Yeah.
Quite the opening.
Yeah, it's really, really strong opening. And I think it establishes everything in like space of a minute, 2 minutes, which again shows what a talented filmmaker she is to have done that so easily, and set up the element of the ribbons, which is part of this sort of fantasy element, but sets it up. I think what I appreciated about that so much is the way that it's something that's so it has that sort of folkloric fantasy fairy tale element, but it's so grounded in reality. It's like mundane in the film. It's just
totally mundane. Yeah, I did absolutely love this. It feels like a really, like an everything and nothing at the same time. And I did really appreciate as well that it's, even though, we know from the context later in the film, or, from the context around the film, that it is in Zambia, but it's not really, it could be anywhere, it could be anywhere on that continent, basically. And apparently there's 3 languages that were used in the film, and the filmmaker was really keen to make it sort of, not necessarily timeless, but like that could happen any place.
Yeah.
So she didn't want to have it to be like, oh, this is a particular place in Africa where this happens, because it's everywhere, really.
Yeah, well, that's it, and that's what it shows, because it has got that universality to it. But I loved I did love the ribbon aspect.
Yes,
because it's a way to make visible the ties that these women are facing, that makes it really the things that are keeping them tied down, and it reminds me of a bit like in Bulbul with the toe ring, that it stops you flying away. It's this idea like women have got to be caged, they've got to be stopped, they've got to be held down, and to do it in a way that is, because I think what's so interesting about that as well is it's seen as consenting. But
that's
really,
exactly it. Yeah.
It's not. It's not that they've not been able. They ain't got the option really to not do it. So it's not really that they're willing, but it's framed like they're willingly doing this.
Exactly, it is framed as exactly what you said, as consenting, because it's quite a flimsy thing. Yeah. And the same, when you mention Bulbul and the ring, is the same thing. It's almost like, it's not really a constraint. It's kind of like it's just something that you have to do, but you're agreeing to do, you're participating in it. And the ribbons, they seem like it's decorative, almost. But as you said, it makes it the more so oppressive.
Yeah, and it's that idea that women are complicit in their own oppression, but we have to look at that from the perspective that the alternative is often, violence or murder, whatever it could be, or even just, being ostracized from communities, having no no support system.
And that's the reality. Yeah. It's just, it's, as you said, it's a case of, they have to be complicit in their own entrapment because they have nowhere else to go. Basically, once they've been accused as witches, it's almost like, those witch camps are saying, we're doing you a favor by offering you shelter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And also, I was going to say also, the tourist thing comes back again and again, and every time it made blood were boiling. I was like, you're the problem!
There is a scene later on which is just so difficult, right, to watch.
Yeah.
But for now, next scene, we see a woman pulling water from a well, and on her way home, she drops the bucket when she sees a little girl in the middle of the road who just stares at her blankly. And I'm sure you noticed this as well. I mean, she's wearing a T-shirt emblazoned with the hashtag booty call on it. So the little girl just stares at her. The woman drops the bucket and she runs away, clearly frightened. We don't know why. But the little girl collects the bucket with the rest of the water and then brings it. I wasn't sure, but I said presumably she brought back to the woman's home because she's seen knocking at the door, but we're not sure what happens then. But a little later, the same woman sits with the child at the local police station and accuses her of being a witch. The woman explained that this child has appeared in the village one day. No one knows her. She says she's a lost person. She has no relatives. She's a witch. She says people are too scared to draw water from that well, not for drinking, not for bathing, because they're all scared of the child. And I don't know what you thought of this. I mean, this whole scene, there's a lot more happening. But it very much feels like a witch trial, doesn't it? Because it's, you get that police officer who looks, she doesn't believe anything that she's hearing. She looks really bored, but also unbothered and unconcerned about the child welfare.
Yeah, and obviously we're interpreting our perspective on this film, but I thought what that scene did were again highlight the way that, these accusations are made and the government and those who are in authority, police and government and so on, are really not concerned about the impact on those accused. Like she's like you said, she's sat there. She's very clearly not taking it seriously that she's a witch. But like you said, that's in that same way, she's not stepping forward and sort of protecting this girl who at this point is unnamed because no one knows her. And what my note actually is that it reminds me of Salem because this little girl, I mean, she's only, I don't know, I'm terrible at age, 8, 6, 7, 8, something like that. She's young, very young. And she's sitting in this room surrounded by adults who are all strangers to her, and they're all crowding through the window and shouting and jeering through the window. And there's just this policewoman sitting there watching very dispassionately while they're making all these accusations. And, she's got this idea that she's got no friends and no relatives and she's just turned up here. And rather than that making people want to look after her and care for her because she's a child, it marks her out for suspicion. And I thought that was so sad that she was treated as a figure of fear rather than there were no compassion for her.
There's absolutely no compassion. Nobody's thinking, what happened to that child.
Yeah, why is she on her own? Why has she got no family?
And we're not giving any context to how long she's been there as well. There's this feeling that she's been there a while, clearly, because people are too scared, scared, to go and draw water from that well. But, nobody seemed to, care where she comes from at all.
Yeah, and I think in that scene as well, so we get this idea about alienation, but we also get this idea about government and officials not necessarily being proactive enough, but also the way that people use these allegations and accusations for their own gain. So there's the guy who says, I saw her in field and she cut my arm off. And he's standing there with both arms. He cut my arm off and, blood were everywhere. And policewoman's like, well, what happened to your arm?
Exactly. You're standing there with two arms.
And
what's happening?
And then he goes, it were a dream I had. And since then, my wife has to do all farming by herself because I'm too scared to go and do work. And you think, you shit house.
Standing there, clearly very drunk. I mean, this whole scene reminded me of the Monty Python sketch about the witch.
Yeah.
When in the Holy Grail, when she's like, she turned me into a newt. Yeah. And, everybody stops and he's like, I got better.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what it's like. But you can see that he's obviously seeing an opportunity to get out of doing this really hard labour by saying, exactly. Oh, she's attacked me, and now my poor wife who's got to do all this labour by herself.
Yeah. When he's clearly standing there drunk and you're like, I don't think it's because of this dream that your wife is doing all the labour. But I do like the introduction there. I mean, there was again, because it's a very satirical film, there's a lot of instances of really dark humour.
Yeah.
And, it's not taking away from, the harshness of the reality of what is happening. But it's so surreal that you almost have to laugh about it because it's so, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think there's a balance being struck in this film that is hard to do, and it just again shows what a talented filmmaker she is, because there is that dark humour and there's bits where you laugh sort of at what people are doing, but she's balanced that with the horror of it, but also the respect for people's beliefs, because it's a very, and I'll talk about that more in sort of when we talk about Folklore Corner, but it's a very difficult thing to do, to be respectful of people's belief systems whilst also critiquing it, but also having that dark that humour to it that is the only way sometimes you can endure things, isn't it? Is by sort of laughing at it. And I think that balance is struck really well sort of throughout.
Exactly. So we're next introduced to Mr. Banda, who's a government official receiving a call from the police officer from the last scene, whom alerts him that they have apprehended a witch. The official, Mr. Banda, so he's clearly very excited about this, tells the police officer that he will be right there and to make sure in the meantime that the girl talks to no one and that no one looks at her even. And so to determine if the child is really a witch, Mr. Banda enlists the help of a witch doctor. Present for the ritual are the woman who accused the child, the police officer, and the child herself, obviously. And the witch doctor draws a salt circle and places a chicken inside the circle. He explains that if the chicken dies inside the circle, the child is not a witch. But if he dies outside the circle, then the child is a witch. Everyone looks on, and the witch doctor performs a ritual dance, egged on by Mr. Banda. And if you notice that he's very, it's kind of like, you're not doing it well enough. It's like you're a witch doctor, but like, can you move more like this? Can you shake like you did before? So this entire scene is kind of, again, playing, that treading that line between, that satirical, that dark humor and something obviously that, that obviously really, really, that happens for real.
Yeah. And I think Mr. Banda is a very interesting character, and he is quite often the sort of comic relief, but also a real dark figure as film progresses. And with the witch doctor and the chicken, what I was struck by is the way that, and this often happens, doesn't it? We see this a lot in when we look at other witch trials and things, is that, it's a tiny circle that this chicken's in.
Yes.
And he's cutting this chicken's head off, or he's slitting it. We don't see, but he either cuts its head off or he slits its throat. And while
I appreciate that, by the way.
I appreciated that, not seeing it. But while we're seeing that, it's like this tiny circle, and so this chicken's flapping about, and but it's like setting up to fail in a way. It's sort of the setting it up, like the dunking. If you float, then you're a witch, and if you sink and drown, well, at least you'll go to heaven. You're like, what the fuck?
Yes, because you can't win either way.
Yeah, this is no choice at all. But yeah, so and we see that he's like, come on, faster, more movement.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that were another really interesting way to tell that story and to present that context in a way that she's very good at show don't tell, which is always the thing you want in a film. It's like setting it up and very quickly can tell you such a lot in a very, very short space of time. So like already we're not that far into the film at this point, but we've got a real good understanding of like what this girl is facing now and the context of it. And I was glad we didn't see the chicken. murder.
Yeah, I think exactly as you said, that once it is portrayed as once the public has cast their vote again, she's a witch, then her fate is pretty much sealed.
Yeah.
And that scene with the chicken, I said, with the tiny circle, it's kind of obvious, what's going to happen. And in fact, we don't get to see where the chicken actually dies, but then in the next scene she's being presented to the camp of witches, which tells you everything you need to know. But I was reading an interview with the director, and she was saying that although this particular story is a complete fabrication, the seed of it is truthful, because in Zambia there is the raw law, which is run by local courts, and that depends on the chief. So when someone's accused of being a witch in some parts of Africa, depending on the chief of the tribe, they bring in 5 witch doctors to judge you and then see if you're a witch, and other people cut a chicken to see how it dies and then to see if you're a witch. So it's kind of like an amalgam of both those things. So she said, although there's both those things, they exist separately, and sometimes they conflict with each other, but in that instance, she brought both of them together.
Yeah.
But as I said, so in the next scene, the child is presented to the witches' camp as a new recruit or member of the community. She's unveiled like a statue.
Yeah.
That was just really bizarre. It's kind of like, and here we are, presenting you with a new gift. And she tries to make a run for it, but 2 men are sent after her. I mean, it was really heartbreaking, that scene, actually, with her trying to, make a break for it. But And I assume that they're beating her off screen and reprimanding her for trying to run away. But again, we don't get to see that. It's quite, as you said, she's really good at show don't tell. But she's also, it's really good that there's loads of stuff that are left off screen that is implied, but we don't actually need to be privy to. They attach a ribbon to her back, and she tries to run away again. But again, she's dragged away she's dragged back by the ribbon. And that evening, the official does a speech to the community of women or witches, and command the women there to sing a song to make her feel welcome. And the song says that they are soldiers of the government. I was wondering what you thought of this idea of those women accused of witches that all of a sudden become a tool for those for the government to be used at their leisure, basically.
Yeah, I thought that idea of witches living in I think as well, he says witches living in cooperation with the government, and then this song about being soldiers for government. And I think it's a very it's an interesting perspective, and I suppose an unusual perspective for people who are used to the very Western, like European stories about witches, where they're just sort of ostracized, and we know in witch trials there were not, in Europe and Americas there were no cooperation. So this is like a different way of looking at it. It's sort of saying, well, you can work with us and and live in this camp, and we'll keep you here. And it's idea about being soldiers for government's interesting, because I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but there's no real apart from obviously we see later with this girl who does eventually get a name, but she's not got one when she arrives. They don't really use the fact that the witches for any gain. There's no. It's not that, oh well, you can use this. You use your powers to help us. It's like labor, and just more of a. There's no other than calling them witches. There's no real acknowledgement of the power that comes with that, these powers that they're supposed to have, which is reason they've been ostracized from the communities. That's just sort of forgotten about. They're just used for other things, for like free labor and everything else.
Exactly. It's just a label used to, and when we see the type of women who gets accused of witchcraft, and in that case that little girl as well, is people who are on the margin of society, and that they're like, we don't know what to do with you, so we'll just
stick you in here, and
exactly, make you work for us.
And I think as well, idea that you've got a choice again. So you've got a choice, so you can either have this ribbon and you can stay here, or you'll turn into a goat. And then they send her into a little sort of hut by herself, and we'll come back in morning and we'll see if there's a witch or a goat. And I thought it were interesting that when they're knocking on door, like, is there a witch here? Is there a witch here? First words we hear her say are, yeah, there's a witch here.
Yeah, there is a witch, yes.
So that's her first words, as she confirms that she's a witch. And she's such a, what I think throughout this film as well is that, you see so much at film from her perspective. You're watching her face a lot at time and where that she's sort of just watching everybody. And she is a very serious, that were a lot of descriptions I saw when I was reading about it. This serious child is found in a village. And she is very serious, but she's very watchful. Like she's just taking it in. She don't really speak. She's very much like a silent observer for a lot of the film, isn't she? She's just like watching what's going on around her. And so I thought it were an interesting choice that were the first thing that we hear her say. Because at one point I thought, maybe she's not going to speak at all. Maybe she's going to be silent. But it's to say, there's a witch here. I'm a witch. Yeah,
exactly. Because it's that... I mean, I did find it really interesting. Exactly, I read a lot of the description of the film. You're saying, she's serious, but you just think... we don't know how long she's been on her own. You don't know what she's had to do to survive to this point. I think it comes from a deep mistrust of people and with very good reason. So actually, the fact that the first word we hear at her is, yes, there is a witch here. You do wonder if she did spend the night in that cabin, pondering a choice. Can I, would that really turn into a goat? Would that be better? I was reading about this, about this choice of, I was wondering if there was something behind it, that choice of, being a witch or being turned into a goat. And the director said that she spent some time in witch camps in Ghana as well as in Zambia when she researched for the film. And in these camps, the women accused of witchcraft have very limited freedom of movement. And every day, sometimes up to 3 times a day, they have to go and work for the chief that provides this little village where they can live and feel protected, apparently. So they're kind of stuck. They can't go back home. They're also used as slaves in those camps. And whilst the director was here, she went out to one of the markets. And in Ghana, apparently, there's goats everywhere roaming freely. So she remembers looking at these goats, and some of them hung out in little groups like families. And she thought to herself, that these goats have more freedom than these women. So she was like, why not include that in the story as well? And this detail is also inspired by a French fairy tale that's called Mr. Seguin's Goat, which tells the story of a goat that wants to escape from the farm, even though she knows that it's gonna face near certain death, but it's asking the question, what is better, to be living in that little enclosure and not having any freedom, or risking it all and be killed outside of it. So in terms of that magic realism of the film, I thought that was such a beautiful element to include. Yeah,
and it's a really beautiful way to express, like you've just said, a really painful truth. And I think we sort of imagine, like as a child as well, to be like, well, would I want to? I mean, I'd have picked to be a goat, to be honest. I'd have rather been a goat. But,
exactly.
But I suppose, again, it's a child who has been alone. She's obviously been abandoned either on purpose or through circumstance. So she's got no one, and she's had this really terrifying encounter with all these people. And, she's somewhere now where they're saying, well, you're going to be safe here. No one's going to hurt you here.
Exactly.
And again, that like, there's no choice, but this is the only choice that you've got. And I think you see that then after the women in that camp then really take her into the sort of celebrate her, and she, they perform like initiation rituals, like she gets these scars on her forehead. A woman who's doing it, I just was so struck by just how gentle she were.
Yes, and keep talking to her through it and being like, don't worry, it's not gonna, it's not gonna hurt, or it's not gonna hurt for very long. We have to do this. But it's very, it feels very caring. So these women, they take her in basically and start, really caring for her. Although that's kind of a double-edged sword as well, and as we'll see a little later as well, that it's that, again, going back to the idea of the matriarchal society and how misogyny exists, within those societies as well. There is, yes, they care for her, but, they also want to gain from, what she has to offer as well.
Yeah. So. Well, I did think, like, after so long, so much time being spent being abused either verbally or, like we said, when they first take her to camp and she's trying to run away, the very, physically rough way to get her back.
Yeah.
And I think the relief of having someone be kind to you
Exactly.
Yeah, and to be maternal and to look after you, must be such a relief. And I think that as well ties into this choice. She's been on her own. Yeah. She knows how hard it is to be on her own. So if she turns into a goat and she's on her own, well, that's like doubly hard. So,
exactly. When you put it that way to a child, it's like, what are they going to choose? Being a witch sounds like a fabulous choice. Yeah. So after being, after making that choice of, becoming a witch, basically, then she's being, as you said, looked after this woman, and for a little while there's sort of a respite for her, right? She seems to be, to be happy, looked after by this woman. They name her Shula, which means to be uprooted, and they really try their best, I think, to look after her. They tell so every day they're being moved from field to field to work, basically, for various people, and they tell the farmer, they argue with him, they said that this little girl is too young, she shouldn't be she shouldn't be working. So whilst the women are working in the field, they give her sort of I'm not sure what it is, kind of like
an ear horn.
Exactly, an ear horn, so that she can listen to the school that's happening nearby. And it's such a lovely, heartbreaking, but really lovely moment. You can see her smile as she's listening, she's hearing the other children, and you can feel she really longs to belong to she belongs to this, where she should be. She should be in school. I actually found out that the little girl who plays Shula, they saw thousands of children apparently to play the role. And when the director met her, she was like, yeah, she's definitely she's the one. And she'd never been to school, so the director set up a GoFund page that so she could be sent to school, and said she's doing marvelously well apparently since. So
amazing,
which is really lovely as well. And I love stories like this when you kind of like, because it's great to see films from sort of deprived communities, and but you always wonder what's what happens to the to the actors after that, so
but I think that's what's so important as well about having someone who has cultural and social and emotional ties to that place telling that story. Exactly. Because she's not just used this girl to play this part in her film. She's invested in making her life better. And Precisely. That's what should happen. And I think it's doing, again, I keep referring back to Bulbul, but I think in a way that there's a lot of similarities in the storytelling in terms of highlighting the way that women and girls are still being treated. So, the fact that she's never been to school, that's still happening, and again, it's so important for people outside of that culture to see these films and to see people's perspectives, because it's easy to turn away from things, isn't it? To look away and to not engage with that reality. But film, and again, to do it in a way that is beautiful to it's a beautifully shot film. It's fantastic, but it's still telling these stories that are rooted in reality. So even with these fantastical elements, they're all still highlighting the reality that people are facing. And I think it's when you see her with ear on listening at school, and I just wanted to cry, because I just think there's so many girls globally who never get to go to school, and they don't get to learn, and they don't get the freedom that comes with education. And it were really, I thought that was such a poignant moment. In fact that these women, it's so interesting that it's these women who are supposed to be villains because they're witches, but they're only ones advocating for her, looking after her, saying you can't work her in these fields all day, she's too little. And and but then within that, and it makes me think about what we've been talking about, the misogyny in these matriarchal communities, because there's a bit where she's saying you're lucky that you've got a long ribbon. A lot of other women have short ribbons,
like this, can't move and
couldn't go anywhere, but you're lucky you've got a long one. And it's that way that misogyny and patriarchy is, well, it's intergenerational trauma, isn't it? That's what these systems do. But the way that it's passed down through these matriarchal lines are like, well, you have it better than me. You're luckier than me. You should be grateful. You've got it easier than I had it. And where that becomes a narrative rather than dismantling the system, it becomes, well, you're lucky because well, I suppose even now, you're lucky because you get to vote. Women didn't used to be able to vote. And it's like, yeah, that's still...
Exactly.
Yeah,
so you should be happy with the little bit of ribbon that you have. And that's why I think this is why, again, like this image of the ribbon works beautifully well, because it's universal. It doesn't just apply to this particular story and this particular time and place.
Yeah.
We all have, a ribbon tied to our back.
That is, and that's it. And that's why I think, and that's such, what a brilliant way to put it, clearly. That was so poetic. Yeah. No, we all have a ribbon on his back, but it's just how long your ribbon is. And
exactly.
The way that she's made that visible so that we see it is so powerful.
It is, yeah. Because that's a complete fabrication, the ribbon. But she did say exactly that it's it's such a beautiful way to visualize it.
To visualize where that you think you're free, but you're not free.
Exactly.
But you're freer than other women have been before you.
So therefore, you should be happy.
You should be happy with what you've got, rather than moaning about what you've got. You should be happy that you ain't got a really short ribbon like people used to have. Yeah, it is. It's such a complex film. There's so many layers to it. Yeah.
And for a short, because it is quite a short film.
Yeah.
That, it packs an enormous amount of messages in it. That So this respite is unfortunately really short-lived because Mr. Banda, comes back and takes her away. She's being used to to run a trial, basically at a village nearby. Basically, he's bringing her to. There is a trial in place. An old man says someone's stealing his money. And the whole scene is kind of made even more surreal by the fact that this old man's phone keeps ringing and he cannot switch it off. So they're trying to be very official and be kind of okay, we're taking this issue very seriously.
Yeah.
But the whole scene is a little surreal. So Shula is asked to choose the guilty party, and obviously she's a child; she has no idea. She's just standing standing dressed in apparel, witch's apparel, and looking at this lineup of people and having to point at someone, and she doesn't know, and so she gets to what I noted down as call a friend.
Yeah.
You get to call a friend, and told by the other witches to pick up the one that looks nervous, that looks to the floor, and also the one that's the darkest one.
Yeah.
So she's being given all this this fake advice basically on how to pick the guilty party. And she picks at random, and luckily it is the guilty party. They go to his house, they find the money, and all of a sudden you can see a switch in Mr. Banda.
Yeah.
His eyes is just thinking, even though you get he doesn't believe in any of it, but you can see that all of a sudden it's kind of like, I get to capitalize on this. And he calls her my little witch.
My little witch.
You're going to be my little witch from now on.
That whole scene with phone ringing and he's like, turn it off, and then he's like, I can't see. So he's like, take battery out of it, just take battery out of it because it keeps ringing. But when she's up first, she's like, I don't know, and she's using her like a human lie detector, and she's like, I don't know what's happening. But what I thought about that scene as well were when they were sitting, in a way that just shows the way that Shula is not remotely safeguarded at any point in this film. They leave her on this minibus with the man she's accused while they go and search out. And the things he says to her is like, when they find out you're lying, we'll stone you or we'll burn you alive. And then he's like, we'll stone you, then we'll burn you. And it's a grown man talking to a child. He's threatening this little child, and he's saying, when they find out you're a liar, this is what we're going to do. But so this is the way that I think that sort of dark satire and that dark humour plays out. So we've seen the trial with this guy who can't turn his phone off. Then we have this horrible... where he's talking to her like that. And Mr. Banda is going, get them all out of house. And then he goes, how many people are in there? Is this an house or a coach? And it really made me laugh because there were just there were about 20 people coming out of this house, and he's there going, come on, get out of the house. But then they find the bag, and he had stolen it. And then they're dragging him off this bus, and they're like, beat him, hit him, like justice, we must have justice. And I think, obviously, we're a guess. Obviously, she just
complete guesswork.
But yeah, like you said, then Mr. Banda thinks, oh well, there's money to be made, and he's a civil servant, isn't he? He's like he's a government official. I mean, I think it's very telling that the first time we meet him, it's his wife giving him a bath,
giving a sponge bath,
sponging him down, But yeah, so he then thinks, oh well, she's powerful, brilliant, can use it for my own gain. She can do this, so let's start exploiting her, and that's then what we see in it.
Exactly. So the next day, I don't know if it's like as a reward or I'm not really sure why, but Shula is being taken to Mr. Banda's house, and is greeted by his wife, who we assume is his wife anyway. And she holds a bottle of spirit in her hand and explains to Shula that before she walks in the house, they have to make an offering to the spirit, or like a witch can't walk in without appeasing the spirits, basically.
Yeah,
because that's bad luck.
Yeah, she says she pours gin on threshold.
That's right, gin. Yeah,
and she says she don't want any bad spirits. So she's like, don't be offended. It's not. I'm not saying not bad about you, but I just don't want any bad spirits to come in. It's only good spirits.
Exactly.
But she so glamorous, isn't she, his wife?
She is
so glam. She's like this really, and really self-possessed. She's really confident. She's living in this massive house, this like beautiful
exactly
home.
But we get to realize very soon that the reason that she maybe is trying to be as poised as as she can be is because she also used to be a witch. So when Shula is exploring the house and she finds this huge spool basically with the ribbon around it, and realizes this that this woman Charity also used to be a witch. So she tells her that yes, she was a witch, but she gained respectability through marriage. And she ensues this long monologue about about how through marriage, then, yes, she was a witch, but now, she is, she's been redeemed and she's part of, society, and, she gets to basically reintegrate society because through this, which is really ironic, right? It's kind of like, from one prison to the next.
Yeah. And that's the thing with it, I think, is that, she's saying to her, I was set free and not turned into a goat because I were respectable. I got married. She keeps saying, I did what I was told, do what you're told, and you can have this life. You can be like me, you can get married.
If you change your evil ways, then
you can be respectable. You can get married. If you get married, that'll set you free from all this. You can have all these things that I've got. But she's still got the ribbon. She's still there. So so
it's never too far.
Yeah.
And there's that threat that keeps coming back from Mr. Banda, from her husband, that he will take her back to where she belongs. And there is a scene a little later on where he keeps saying to her that, so clearly she's, she's not that safe from being sent back.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like she's got freedom, she's got this respectability, but only on Mr. Banda's terms and only on society's terms. So she's allowed the freedom of being a respectable married woman, but only for as long as he allows it.
He decides, Yeah. It's really ironic, isn't it? That, not ironic, but it's, he is paraded around in the whole film as a bumbling buffoon. It's like, he really is an idiot. He's there is again, there is a scene a little later on where he's just like crawling on the floor in front of, but, and there, someone calls him an idiot, and, rightly so, but he's also very threatening. It's still, despite being a complete idiot, he's still the one who holds the power.
Yeah, and that's it. And that's the thing about the dangers of men and patriarchal society, the dangers of that, and the fact that he's a bumbling fool, but he's still got the power of ultimate power over your life.
Exactly.
And
due to the privilege of his birth. That's
and for his wife as well, for Charity, that she sort of takes Shula under her wing and he's very kind to her, but that's still rooted in exploitation. So although she's nice to her, and it's still sort of trying to teach her how to serve, how to serve Mr. Banda and the government, and, the way that she should behave and that again, like that, or just be a good girl, and
yes.
then you'll not
That's
be punished.
It is disguised as, if you play by the rule that, that they invented, then, you'll have a bit, you'll be freer.
Yeah.
So again, like the ribbon still exists, but, it'll be longer. So, it's almost like one day your ribbon will be so long you won't even realize, the ribbon is there.
Yeah. Until someone decides to yank it and pull you back. Yeah.
Pull it back. Yeah. So from there on, Shula is paraded around, forced to perform rituals from, places to places. But meanwhile, we also see the harsh and absurd conditions that the women in the witch camp endure, as well as the triviality in which these women are accused of witchcraft. In one scene, for example, we see, so while the women from the camp are working at, I don't know what it is, like excavation site?
Yeah, it's like a quarry, isn't it? Yeah.
Like a quarry, exactly. A woman and a man appear on a motorbike. The woman gets off the bike, gets off the back of the bike, and as she walks toward the women, one of the old women starts throwing rock at the guy, and they start arguing. And the woman shouts, "Why are you coming here with him? Like, he accused me of being a witch. This is the reason. This is the reason why I'm here. What is he doing here?" And the scene after that, we see the women the woman got off the back of the bike is there to sell her wares, jewelry and her wigs, and this scene is completely absurd. Yeah. But it's one of the rare scenes where, in terms of where the film takes place, that we understand like it's very much rooted in the present and how aware these people are of pop culture, US pop culture, because, there is all that talk about the wigs being, this one is the Rihanna, and that's Beyonce, and Kim Kardashian, because I'm sure that made me laugh so much.
But that's it. And when we see as well that, obviously, as Shula's, done these, performed as she should in these rituals, they're all really proud of her, and she gets offerings, and so she brings them back. And so then in this scene, that's when we start to see that there's exploitation all around her, because
exactly, so these women who are supposed to look after her and who do care for her, I truly believe that, but they also have a gain from it, because they say they want to get the wigs, and they're like, and one of the women asks, how you expected to pay for this, and one of them says, well, Shula with her offerings,
we'll use Shula's gin. Exactly. Shula will bring it back, and so she's like, oh, well, you can pay me 2 bottles of gin for this, and you can pay me this, and it's all dependent on Shula doing what she's supposed to do, so they get these offerings so that they can then use that to get these wigs, which, it's, again, I think you can read that as a very interesting commentary on what poverty and oppression and violence does to people, because they've got no opportunity to get these offerings. They're just being forced to work in fields and quarries and whatever they're doing that they're not being paid for. And their lives are so hard. And then they're like, well, why don't I deserve to have this one pleasure when I'm stuck here working, toiling day after day? But only way they can do that is to exploit Shula. So then it's like the cognitive dissonance of, exploiting her, but seeing it as, well, she's young, she can bear it, I'm old.
We care for her, so she's helping her, we're helping her, and she's helping us. So
and that's the thing, I think it never presents anyone's behaviour in a sort of binary black and white way, that it's good or it's bad, or, someone's wrong or they're right. It's got all that complexity to it of what else is going on around these decisions that are being made. And, we see that everyone's using it. Like, at one point, Mr. Banda says, it's government property. Talking about Shula, like, this is government property, you can't touch it. Because, that's the scene when, I think that's the one, isn't it? When a man sees her, he's left her on her own on that minibus, and a man sees her and he comes up to glass and he starts banging at glass and he's like, you're a witch. You're one who killed I can't remember, a family member. And he's trying to get in, and he's trying to get to her, and she's petrified. And then Mr. Banda comes and he's like, what are you doing? What do you think you're doing? He's like, there's a witch, bring her outside. And he's like, that's government property. That's my property. You don't touch that. And she's just this terrified little child sat on this minibus, like, while these men are, the threat of violence towards her all the time.
I think that threat of violence is true for all the women in this film, and you can see that there is no nowhere is safe. And despite what Charity is saying about, gaining respectability and getting, to live freely, there is a scene just after that where, she takes Shula she goes to a supermarket to buy some more gin for the next ritual that they're doing, and she comes out of that supermarket and people start shouting at her, shouting at Charity, calling her a witch, throwing things at her, threatening to kill her on the spot, and she tries to defend herself. You can see she, in that moment, you kind of like, you don't have your freedom. You don't have that respectability that that you're being, that you've been sold through marriage, or you've been redeemed or whatever. It's like, the truth is, it's like witch or woman, you are, it's the same. Well, they are the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that scene, because she has to take, so even though she's free, she still has to wear ribbon when she goes out. So she's trying to go eat supermarket and she's got it in trolley. And it's like covered up, but obviously they see it because it's clipped to her back. And the way that marks her out as, and she's saying, "I'm married. Who do you think you're talking to? I'm respectable. I'm a married woman. You can't talk to me like this." But it just highlights that it don't matter because you're still a witch.
You're still marked. You're still marked.
And I thought that were a really interesting way to show from Shula's perspective, because she's left in car and she's watching this through a window. This life that Charity is promising her, oh, you could have all this. She's probably thinking, I don't want this. I don't want this. This is awful. And it's just, again, that exploitation then when they take her to see this man who, this white guy who, the promising rain, she can tell you when it's going to rain. And he's like, well, when is it going to rain? And he goes, it will rain. It will rain. I promise you. But I think that's the thing, because it's genuinely just after that, what she's seen happen to Charity, and she really withdrew into herself. She doesn't want to perform anymore. She doesn't want to. She's not there for it, and it's really heartbreaking, that scene. That white man is there, sitting behind his desk, waiting for that rain dance to have to appear. What he's been promised. That transactional thing that is supposed to happen, and Charity is doing her best to be like, as part of the ritual, and she just she shakes her arms and kind of like, it will rain, and it's done, it will rain, it'll come. And the fact that I thought it was very interesting that it is this white guy sitting there doing it, because again, that colonialism, that the violence of colonialism is
and that willingness to turn if it's for your own gain, literally.
You're not saying, why is this little girl here at this time of night? Shouldn't she be at school? Shouldn't she be in bed? Shouldn't she be being looked after? Why are you dragging her out to do this? Because he don't care, because he's benefiting from it. Even though, and she refuses to play the game anymore. She's not playing. She's not doing what they want her to do. And you see how quickly that the sort of veneer of care slips when she's not performing like they want her to.
Absolutely. I think it's one of the point of the film also where you realize actually the witches have the power to, figuratively at least, to screw the men and not vice versa.
Yeah, because she's...
It's like, if I refuse to be a performing monkey, then you have... nothing,
Yeah, if I don't do the thing that you want me to do, what are you going to do about it?
Exactly.
Because even if, whatever consequence he could give to her, she'll still not do what he wants her to do, and he can't force her. And that's when you start to see that. And there's a scene where, which might be a bit later on, where she'll not let him in. She's sitting in minibus and she's locked it, and he's like, "Open door, I can't get in," and she just ignores him and she's just staring at him, and he's like, "Why have you left keys in there?" It's funny because they're like running around trying to get in this van, and then he manages to open window and he's like, lift me up," and he can't fit, and he's like, watch me sew, you'll get in, someone else climb in, and then they open door and he's shouting at her, and he's really shouting at her, and she's just staring at him. No,
she's completely blank exactly by that point. And it's really interesting because at this whole point, they were away. I mean, she wasn't, on the bus on her own. And so you think it's almost like she could have, she could have also up and go,
she could have run away
at that point. But she's just so,
Well, it's that, you know, the sort of the fatigue of living like that, isn't it? The fear that everyone's putting in her, the way that I suppose she knows the things she does is bringing these things that benefit these women who are looking after her and who are kind to her. So it's like that as well is, you know, wanting, you can see that in that, you know, just not wanting to disappoint them, but also the I suppose the fear of, well, what'll happen to me if I am on my own, because she's seen like this
she's seen what happens to on their own. But interestingly, so you were talking about, you know, that scene the rain dance, and you know that man not asking, you know, why is this child here at this time of the night? She should be in bed. Should someone look after her? So in the next scene, Shula and Mr. Banda are on a TV show. They, you know, they come in there to. They've been invited to you know, to parade her around as an unusual witch. You know, she's not an old woman. She's quite unusual. She's a
not
child
an old
witch.
Stinky woman. He says witches are usually an old stinky woman, but not this time.
And he also reassures the presenter and the audience that they're safe to have Shula in the studio. She's tied to a ribbon. She won't fly around snatching their children or pets. So, you know, it's quite safe. He also uses this opportunity to promote some products. He says his eggs, Shula eggs.
Shula eggs.
That will bring back the laugh in your breakfast. So the complete commodification of the witch there as well. But then the program accepts call from viewers, and the first call they get is someone asking quite rightly, you know, what is that child doing there? You know, shouldn't she be? You know, does she go to school? Shouldn't she be in school? And also, you know, and I think the presenter turns to Mr. Banda and says, you know, what if she's just a child? What if she's not a witch and she's in fact just a child?
Just a child, and she's sitting there in this, you know, in a witch attire, and she's got this big sort of headdress on and a ribbon and the fact that the ribbons are all on these big spools, and they just put them on hooks and stuff, and it's such a vivid image where she's sitting there, and you know but the thing that made me laugh, but also I think is very telling in that, is when Mr. Banda says, why have you let them say that? Freedom of speech can be misused.
That's right.
That's a misuse of freedom of speech. And it's like, yeah, because the you know, calling you out. But then it pans to all the audience in this studio, and it's nearly all women. And they've all got faces like thunder, like looking at her.
The expression are really angry, solemn, and sad.
And she's just weeping. You can see tears coming down Shula's face, and it's so sad. And everyone in there is angry and like you say, sad and furious that this little girl's being paraded around on TV as a witch, as a commodity.
Exactly. And being dehumanized as well, because Mr. Banda goes on to say, you know, she's not a normal person. She's a witch. She doesn't have feelings.
Yeah, she doesn't have feelings.
She's sitting there with, you know, tears streaming down her face.
Yeah.
And I did think that scene was just so, you know, amazing, and kind of turning into the audience, you know, quite literally. So after that, you know, we see Shula back at the witch camp, and she's in a kind of like a papier-mâché hut, basically being isolated from the other from the older women and those tourists. You know, this scene is so disgusting, and it makes you so angry, even more so than the first scene. But you know, this American woman, you know, goes to see her, and you know, why is she sad? You know, you know, what? Oh, you know, are you all right, darling? And you're like, oh, let's take a selfie with you. That will make you smile.
That'll cheer you up.
Exactly. And she has the audacity to say to her, I'll send it to you. How about that? I'll send it to you. And it's just, you know, it's just so, such a horrible moment, and, you know, kind of, really like a dark commentary on, you know, on you know, dark tourism as well.
I think it's really talking about dark tourism and poverty tourism that, you know, I'll not get on my soapbox about. First time I've mentioned my soapbox, actually, surprisingly.
You have, that's true, yeah.
I've been very restrained, but I'll not get on my soapbox about it. But I think the way that Western people go to places and are part of and directly influence the exploitation of people who've got no choice is something that is, again, it's highlighted in a very short scene here. It's a couple of minutes we're watching it, but the rage that you feel watching this privileged woman who's come on this tour bus to look at these women. Like, they're like exhibiting them. It's like they're and that's got such horrible colonialist connotations. And she's sitting there on her own in this, like, in isolation, and it'll cheer you up to take a photo with me. Well, no, wait, why would that cheer her up? You idiot! It's just this idiotic way that people justify.
Exactly, because it is being sold to them also as like, it's a different, it's part of the culture. Yeah. So, it's like it's a different culture. So, we just here soaking up the culture when you're kind of like, no, you are here feeding, this colonialism and, this injustice and doing nothing about it and participating in it actively. And
you're the reason that these women are being treated like that, because there's no supply without demand. So there's demand for to look at these women and point at them and see them and make them perform, and you're the problem. And I think it's another element to film that is done really well to show that as well, the impact of that, I think. And it's just so sad. And I was like, you're a fucking monster. That woman, you fucking monster.
Exactly.
She's just this little girl, and you it's unthinkable, isn't it? Like, to be taking photos of these women who've been isolated from the communities, who are obviously like not willing participants in your horrible sideshow.
Because they ask questions, right? Because they say, does she know why she's here? Does she know why she's been accused of being a witch? And and she answers no every time. And then there's that, should we take a picture then? Yeah. Instead of being kind of like, oh my God, like, this shocking, being put in front of this and not be, literally showing no compassion, no understanding of what is happening there. Yeah. But, we get another, little short respite, actually, because Shula gets to go to school presumably after the intervention of the collar on that TV show. And I did really love that scene, because it's really lovely to see how children, there's no questioning from the other children of, why is she here? Why does she have that ribbon? They're not separating from her. She's part of, she's instantly being accepted, in that cohort, and I thought that it's so lovely. It's kind of almost a glimpse of like the life that she should have,
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, that she's accepted, and it's obviously a school. There's a lot of different children there, and she just fits in. They're not, even though she comes in and she's got ribbon, and so she's obviously a witch. They don't comment on it. She just takes a seat and she's part of it. And then we see him like playing a game, and she's just being a child, like she should be. She should be able to be a child. And I think it's such a beautiful, touching scene. But then obviously we see that she's just dragged back. And when she's being dragged through, so someone starts to wind ribbon in, and you see her face, and she's just got such a resigned face while she's being dragged back through these woods, and it's so heartbreaking.
It's so heartbreaking. So sad. It's just knowing that there's no, as you said, her face is really resolved to her fate, right? She's just kind of like, this is never gonna get better than this. And it's and as obviously we're nearing the end of the film, with this scene, and that night she's back at the camp with the older women, and when prompted, she said that she wished she had asked to be transformed into a goat.
Yeah,
realizing that in fact, it's probably it would have been better to face death on her own than, being entrapped in this manner.
And then they say, they'd kill you and eat you if you'd have been a goat. So it's like, well, then there were no choice at all, were there? So it's,
exactly.
That's the outcome. And I think it's as well that we see the scene with Mr. Banda and the sort of, I think she's royalty, isn't she? She's the queen.
That's right.
Yeah. And she's like, we don't send witches to school. We don't, this is, so that's why she's forced to leave. So she has to go back, and she can't bring rain. She's not allowed to go to school. So she has to go back to hard labour. And that's when she wishes she'd been a goat, and that's that. And you feel this real heartbreak. And it's so sad that, that she's not allowed to be a child, and even people with this authority are like, no, she's not a child, she's a witch. Again, that dehumanization,
making she's not a normal person.
Yeah,
and no, she can't be granted those rights. It is really heartbreaking. Yeah, this scene that, and again, commenting back on that matriarchal society, where that misogyny really very much exists, of being kind of like, well, no, she's not a little girl. No, she can't go to school. No, she can't do this. She has to go back to the hard labor. We've made our judgment. She's a witch. She's not one of us.
And she's not benefiting us because she's not bringing rain like she's supposed to.
Exactly.
And but we do see that she's sort of trying to do it, and she's she's in field and she's gathering all this stuff, and she's trying so hard to. She does this, she's dancing, she's trying to do this like sort of ritual, and she's trying so hard, and it's that again being set up to fail.
Yeah.
That she can't do what they're asking her. It's not whatever she does, she can't do it. And it's really, really sad. Yeah, it is. I think that is really heartbreaking.
It is, yeah. And because of this, because of all the things and the war's closing in, obviously, on her and, in her fate. So in the middle of the night, she's seen walking out of the tent where the other women are sleeping and attempting to cut her ribbon and presumably leave, she's, trying to leave, basically. But that's all we see. Yeah. And basically it cuts to the next morning, presumably, and a couple of men are riding a carriage in a deserted field. Again, in a very surreal turn of event, one of them is listening to American Girl by Estelle and Kanye West through his headphones. Yeah. We have no context in what they're doing there. It's a day like any other, basically, but they stop towards the edge of the field, and we see them dragging a body bag, basically, out of the back of their carriage and dumping it there before continuing on their way. And the women find the body in the field. And we can rightly assume that it is the body of Shula, and we hear thunder rolling in the distance, and it's just it's the most heartbreaking scene. I mean, I was absolutely in tears watching this.
It's so sad because I mean, there's the surreal, like, old belief and new world aspect to him listening to, on American Boy on wireless headphones while he's dragging a witch's body into a field. But it's the way that, I mean, we never see that it's Shula. We never see her again after we see her sort of tugging on her ribbon. Yeah. Because it's wrapped in a sheet. But I mean, it's a small body, isn't it? Which I think makes it so much worse when you see all women surrounding this this sheet, and it's very small. So we assume that it is Shula.
And in the next scene, we see them all clad in red.
Yeah.
They obviously crying over the body, and the body is actually wrapped in that ribbon.
Yeah.
So again, as you said, it's like can kind of assume that is that, and finally it starts raining, and it's it's
so beautiful. I think it's the way that when it's so when the women see that there's something in this field and run over to it, and then she starts to scream, basically, and she's weeping, and then everybody runs, all these women run, and then you see them all in these red these red robes, and they're singing a song to her, and it's like, I'm gonna cry. It's making me want to cry. And like, this is your last celebration. This is, you have your birthday, but this is your last one, and they're like celebrating her and singing, and then they're all sitting in this circle, and it starts to rain, and it's just really rain, like biblical rain.
It pours.
And I think then that sort of final scene. So we've seen them all sitting, and they're all very somber. They're all sort of just sitting, like, contemplating. You can see them all just sort of thinking about Shula and everything. But then for like the
one last shot,
the last shot is the truck that's always transported them. That's got it's set up with these like spikes to put the ribbon spools on, and the spools the ribbons are just flapping, and they've all been cut. And then in distance we hear a goat.
Yeah, I just love that it's completely silent, and there's ribbons flying freely in the wind, and
it's giving me goosebumps. It's
it does me, and I see it's just rewatching it yesterday for it. I was just like, it's just such striking, beautiful image. Again, like, you said at the beginning, of this episode, how she's, such a fantastic director for, show, don't tell. And this last image it's everything, I'm going to cry.
Yeah. Yeah, but just these ribbons all flapping, that they're all empty and it's silent, like you say. It's just this, it's so poignant and it's so evocative and so sad, and it's really a really, really powerful final scene.
Shot.
Yeah,
definitely. Which and again, going back to is this film a horror film? No, not in the traditional sense of the way, but in the traditional sense of the term, rather. Sorry, but I think as a contender for a social horror, I think it's right up there, and Anyway, if you haven't seen it and you've listened to this whole discussion, then hopefully we've convinced you to run and watch it.
I hope so. Yeah, I would recommend that anybody watch it, because I think what it's doing is important as well.
Such an important film. Yeah.
So, should we get to the very depressing folklore corner this week? I do want to just give a little content warning. Obviously, we've been talking about various distressing things, about this film, and I will be sort of talking about them a little bit more. But I've tried not to be too sensationalist about it, because, I think it's with this, what I really wanted to do is, I suppose, build on the picture that is being painted in the film. And I think there's a balance to be struck with that, which again is a balance that I think is struck really well in this film, between telling the truth and being unnecessarily graphic and exploitative. So I've tried to strike the balance, and hopefully I've done that. So in terms of belief in witchcraft in Africa, obviously Africa is a continent. It's very diverse. So there's various beliefs and practices across different countries and different cultures. But to make a bit of a sweeping generalisation, these beliefs do play a significant role, and have historically played a really significant role in shaping social dynamics and influence how communities seek spiritual assistance. But there are, we've talked about colonialism. There's going to be a lot of colonialism in this.
Rightly so.
Rightly so. It's unavoidable. There's been a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings around witchcraft in Africa. And part of this is because of Western scholars like Margaret Murray, who we've talked about before in this series, who sort of presented what they saw as from an anthropologist perspective. And it's led to a lot of distortions and misconceptions. And part of the reason for this is because these people are approaching this subject through a comparative lens. So they're looking at African belief in witchcraft compared to European belief in witchcraft, and obviously they're not comparable.
Comparable,
totally different things. But in terms of prevalence in the sort of Central African Republic, hundreds of people are convicted annually of witchcraft. Reports of violence against women. In Democratic Republic of the Congo, there's a trend of accusing children, much like we see in the film, that leads to abuse and exorcisms from self-styled pastors and exorcists. And I'll talk in a bit more detail about this. But in Ghana, which were a big influence on the film, the accusations are frequently made against women, and this leads to existence of witch camps that we see in the film. And in Kenya, we see that there's reports of mobs burning those that are accused. And then in Malawi, there's also issues of child witchcraft accusations, with sort of exorcisms, abandonment and abuse of children as a result. And in Nigeria, we see Pentecostal pastors. So again, colonialism's influence on this, I think, is integral to understanding it. And I'm not claiming to understand it entirely. Obviously, I contextualise my reading of it through the fact that I'm a white Western woman. So, you know, but this intertwining of Christianity with traditional beliefs, and this is what we're seeing a lot now in these sort of Pentecostal churches, that Christianity has become sort of enmeshed with traditional belief. And what we see, unfortunately, is that children are accused of witchcraft, and this results in sort of torture and the killing of these children. And a lot of the time, this is through these exorcisms that people carry out. But having said that, so this paints, and obviously it is a very dark picture to be painted, but we have to look wider than just the negative. In Sierra Leone, the Mende people actually see witchcraft convictions as beneficial because it allows those that are accused to receive care and support from the community. So it's not a blanket thing that accusation and conviction results in negative outcomes, although overwhelmingly it does. But in places like Sierra Leone, it's seen as a way to get support. And people are not necessarily as ostracized as we see in other places. So a historian called Jacob Olopano writes about witchcraft and religion in Africa, and this is a direct quote, that African religions are not static traditions, but have responded to changes within their local communities and to fluxes caused by outside influences and spread with diaspora and migration, and witches in Africa serve as authority figures and intermediaries between the social world and the cosmic realm. So there's a very, I think, complex relationship to witchcraft. And again, this is a generalization because obviously each nation and each culture has their own perspectives on it. But I think it's interesting to see that there is this idea about authority figures and that witches are seen as a way to communicate with ancestral spirits, with deities, with sort of this cosmic realm. And so there is I think a respect given at points to people who are painted as witches. I think the danger that we see comes when people are accused of being witches rather than... So, there's witch doctors in this film. We see this witch doctor. They're quite often respected in communities. But if someone's accused of being a witch, then that's when we sort of start to see these more negative outcomes. And obviously, again, colonialism bingo. How many times have unfortunately it's
get your cards out.
But we've already seen that it has impacted our understanding of belief because what we have as a sort of global community have done is to see European and Western systems as the default and then other cultures as the other. So African witchcraft is painted as this other because it defaults from our understanding of, belief in Europe. But if we think about the impact of that across time points, I think it's helpful to think about sort of pre, during and post colonialism because you can really see that influence there. So in pre-colonial Africa, there were a lot of indigenous practices that involved some societies attributing these supernatural abilities to certain people. And again, not necessarily... these could be beneficial. People could be seen as having healing abilities, but they could also be malevolent. People could cause harm, and I think we've seen that a lot when we've talked about other.
We've seen that everywhere.
That it's sort of there's sort of good magic and bad magic, good witch, bad witch sort of thing. But after arrival of European colonialist powers, there were significant changes. And this included the assertion that belief in witchcraft was superstition, the great irony being that we'd already had our own witch trials. But the idea that this was superstitious belief. And so as colonialists do in every country that they, infect, they sought to stamp out these indigenous practices. And this led to the criminalisation of witchcraft. And we see that sort of throughout the sort of history of the sort of, I hate to say slave trade, but we see the history of that, and as people were trafficked and forced from their communities across the Caribbean and into North America and even into South America across the Caribbean, that these fears grew. And this was because colonialists feared the strength of these beliefs, and so they sought to destroy this really rich cultural heritage that it represented. And this is what we see in colonialism, that there's always attempts to destroy culture and to force assimilation to Western culture. And so one example of this was the belief in Obeah, which came with people who were forced to leave Africa, trafficked into the Caribbean, and they used Obeah to attack the captors. And so as a result, the practice of Obeah was prohibited by Europeans out of fear. And this is both fear of the power of the belief, but also the power of practitioners to organise and to, to encourage rebellion. So the way that these, if people were allowed to practice their beliefs, they were obviously practicing together, it were a social thing, and that's where dissent starts. And that's when we might see uprisings and rebellions. And so this attempt to stamp it out. And so this has resulted in this really complex interplay between traditional beliefs and foreign religions like Christianity. So this influx, as I was saying about, Pentecostal pastors picking up on Christianity, but there's still this influence of these traditional beliefs as well. So post-independence, in some African countries, we see there's, even today, there's a continued struggle with witchcraft-related issues. And this is generally accusations and then the resulting violence that comes from it. Like we see in the film, the idea that if someone's accused, that can lead to a very violent reaction from the community. And so it remains a significant aspect to a lot of people's lives. But legal responses have emerged that seek to protect people. So a lot of countries in Africa are trying to, rather than criminalising the witch, are trying to criminalise the accusation because of the deadly consequences that still arise from being accused. And also, I think it's important to say that practices and beliefs have continued to evolve within this context of modernisation and globalisation. So like this last scene in film, when somebody's got Bluetooth headphones on listening to American Boy, whilst still partaking in these traditional beliefs around witchcraft. And this is what globalization does. And so we know that belief doesn't disappear, it evolves. And I think witchcraft belief in Africa, because of colonialism and now because of globalization and because of the diaspora, is a really complex and fascinating case study that shows how that belief changes. In terms of traditional beliefs, obviously they're so diverse, it's not really possible to be like, this is what witchcraft looks like. But as I've already said, it very often centres on like healing or malevolence, that there'll be some aspects of this. But it reflects this continent's really wide varieties of cultures and belief systems. It's things we would expect that we would see in other cultures, like healing and divination and worshipping ancestral spirits and deities. Some of the most well-known traditions that I'm sure people will have heard of are things like Vodun, Hoodoo, Santeria, the Ifa and Orisha religion, and Candomblé. I hope I'm pronouncing these all right. And I could spend all day talking about these, but I won't. I really could. I think, they're so rich and they're fascinating, and each have their own blend of these traditional beliefs and colonialist influences, including elements of Catholicism. So this is a direct result of the diaspora. And so there's this real influence of African witchcraft traditions on brujeria in Latin America. So as part of people being sort of trafficked into Caribbean, we still see this influence now. And I never use the word melting pot because it's incredibly racist. But, this idea, because people don't melt into one homogenous lump. But when you see these different cultures and beliefs come together, it's amazing, I think, how they evolve. And now we see this evolution. So particularly we see this in Brazil and Cuba and Caribbean. And so this is marked by syncretism, which is, I think, fascinating. And I have done a lot of reading about this because I did do a lecture on occult crimes. And so I talked about some of these religious beliefs as part of that. So I am familiar with syncretism, and I think it's horrible that it exists, but it's fascinating the way that people have utilised it. So syncretism is when traditional beliefs merge with indigenous, European and Christian elements. And we see it predominantly, as I've already said, in like the diaspora, in the way that people have been forced to leave their cultural and ancestral home and be somewhere else that's got this influence quite often of a very brutal Christianity. So one example is Santeria, which during the period when enslaved individuals were trafficked from Africa into Cuba, Catholicism was the only legal religion. So anyone practicing something that wasn't Catholicism faced penalty and punishment. And so what people did in order to avoid this punishment, and this is what syncretism means, is they essentially map their traditional deities onto Catholic saints so that they could be seen publicly to be worshipping Catholic saints, but actually were worshipping their own ancestral spirits and deities. So one example is Obatala is worshipped under guise of Jesus, and there's lots of examples of ways that different deities have been mapped onto Catholic saints, and in this way people were allowed to continue their religious beliefs without being punished by the dominant social and religious order. And these have now grown, like Orisha does this a lot, that there's different colours and different saints that have been mapped onto different deities, and it's a really fascinating testament, I think, to how enduring belief is, and that even in such hardship and such time, such violence and struggle, that people hold on to the culture. And yes, this is a depressing one.
Yeah, but it's also so fascinating, and I'm being silent throughout because I don't know anything about it, and it's just so fascinating to hear you talk about it in those terms. So yes, it's and of course it's history, just, especially colonialist history. It's never going to be a walk in the park,
Yeah, so. And that's the thing. And any time that we're talking about a country that suffered under colonialism. Even now in modern day, colonialism is still having an impact. We can't, we can't claim that. Oh well, that's that.
Exactly, that's in the past, and that it's so yeah.
And part of it is the way that the way that beliefs change and beliefs are affected. But what I think is interesting, there's this really interesting example. That I've got two examples, one from Ghana and one from Democratic Republic of Congo, which is around penis snatching, a big concern. So, but I thought interesting.
Always around witches, actually. Enough. It's like,
So I thought it were interesting because we've talked about that in terms of stealing potency, or even in Europe, there's all the woodcuts or witches with like penis trees and whatever.
Yeah, penis trees.
So it's again that idea of different sort of diverse cultures, but there's these universal elements that humans share. This underlying sort of fears of humanity. Men are scared that people are going to steal the penis.
Which is definitely a man-made monster, isn't
it? Absolutely.
The greatest fear.
Yeah, but so in 1997 in Ghana, arrests were made to avoid further bloodshed after 12 alleged penis snatchers were beaten to death by mobs. In 2008, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, police arrested 13 suspected sorcerers who had been using dark magic to steal or shrink men's penises. So these are just two examples. There are other examples. But why I think this is important is because so those who were accused of penis snatching were said to have done it to extort cash, basically to exchange for a cure. You pay us and we'll reverse this. So on one hand, you see the impact of socioeconomic hardship and the way that traditional belief interplays with that. But also it's important because it highlights one of the roles of witchcraft in society. And this is being discussed by Uchenna Okasia, who argues that a belief system in which such magical practices are deemed possible offers many benefits to the people who hold them. And so, for example, this belief that a sorcerer has stolen a man's penis functions as an anxiety reduction mechanism for men who are suffering from impotence. While simultaneously providing an explanation that's consistent with African cultural beliefs rather than appealing to Western scientific notions, which a lot of people are suspicious of, and in the eyes of many African people are tainted by colonialism. So, while I'm not suggesting that any of these people who were, harmed as a result of these accusations, I think, again, when we talk about the way that this is not a binary issue, it's a very complex issue. I think this highlights that, which is that, people might not want to explore what are seen as Western scientific beliefs because of this history of colonialism and the dangers of the West. So instead, the way that people manage anxiety about the health, about the potency, about the masculinity, is to say, a witch has done this. This is witchcraft. I'm being targeted. And it's a way to manage that when there's maybe not as much knowledge. Like we've talked about with witch trials previously in Europe.
Exactly, a way to rationalise and to explain. Oh, well, not rationalise it because that's not rational, but a way to explain something that...
something that is unexplainable to you. But interestingly enough, in some countries, so Gambia is one example, there are examples of state-sponsored witch hunts. So rather than this just being something that happens in communities, there have been examples where the state has sanctioned it. So former President Yahya Jammeh, I hope I'm doing all these names justice, my apologies if not, led a state-sponsored witch hunt that reached its peak from sort of 2008 to 2009, which led to the torture and murder of as many as 1,000 citizens, and many of these were elderly citizens. And President Jammeh had a strong belief in witchcraft and used his position to seek to eradicate it from Gambia. And he left power in 2017, and so although accusations might not have stopped, it's been suggested that they haven't got the same state-sponsored legitimacy now. And what we're seeing now is, as I said earlier, a move away from criminalising the witch to criminalising the accuser, to try and get on top of, this violence and the dangers of being accused. But I should point out that UNICEF and sort of associated partners have raised concerns about the level of violence faced by children in Africa generally, but drawn attention to violence that results out of accusations of witchcraft, which isn't as discussed as often as other forms of violence. And while children aren't the only ones accused, women often face accusations. Children very often do suffer. So this is, I'm going to talk about violence towards children for a little bit. So if anyone who's uncomfortable, just skip forward. So as of 2006, between 25,000 and 50,000 children in the Democratic Republic of the Congo are being accused of witchcraft and thrown out of their homes. And so like we see with Shula, that could be why Shula, we don't know that that's why, but that could be one reason why she was on her own in that village. These children are often subjected to violent abuse during exorcism. And I think we've talked about exorcism before, that these are done, and they're not done by... I suppose it's a difficult one, and I think what we have to be conscious of is not doing what everybody's done historically, which is approaching it from a Western lens of this is what reality is, because, reality is not universal. And I don't want to see this to be seen as though I'm being critical of beliefs and people who hold these beliefs. I just think it's important in context of film that we're talking about to provide like the context of, what inspired this film. So these children are often referred to as enfants sorcières. Excuse my French there, clearly. In Malawi, it's common to accuse children of witchcraft, and as a result, much like in Democratic Republic of the Congo, they're abandoned, abused, or killed as a result. And in Nigeria, as I've already mentioned, Pentecostal pastors have often mixed this evangelical Christianity with this traditional belief to profit from lucrative witch findings and exorcisms. So a bit like Mr. Bandar was profiting from Shula, these pastors profit from being witch finders. I mean, we all know about our feelings about witch finders, or Matthew Hopkins, and exorcism. So it's a very lucrative business to be making accusations, much like it were in Europe.
Exactly.
So this used to be the domain of witch doctors, like we see in the film, or traditional healers, but this shows how these beliefs have continued to evolve in tandem with these wider socio-cultural developments. So what used to be the remit of the witch doctor, the traditional healer, is now the comes under the scope of the evangelical pastor. So the way that Christianity has infiltrated and sort of overtaken traditional belief. So these pastors have been accused,
but while serving the same while serving the same purpose.
Yeah,
which is the real.
That's the thing. The labels changed, but the purpose is the same. Yeah. So these pastors have been accused of torturing and even killing children as part of these exorcisms. And in the states of Akawa Ibom and Cross River, around 15,000 children have been accused, with around 1,000 children murdered from 2000 to 2010. So, as well as it being lucrative, part of the reason for this is due to the large number of churches in Nigeria. So there's massive competition for congregations to actually get people attending your church. So as a result, some pastors seek to establish their reputation as being spiritually powerful by detecting child witches. And so, as we see a lot, this often follows a death or someone losing the job, and then a child's accused. In the film, it's that, all these things have started to happen since Shula's arrived. It's scapegoating that we see we've talked about a lot in this series. And in the course of these exorcisms, children are often starved, beaten, mutilated, set on fire, or forced to consume acid or cement, or they're buried alive.
Oh my God.
And I try to avoid talking about things like this because I never want to be sensationalist, but I think in the context of this film that's telling this really important story, it's important for us to be honest about what's happening and not to look away. I think there's a real tendency, and we've already talked about it in this episode, to look away from what's not directly affecting us. But I'm going to finish on talking about the witch camps in Ghana because obviously this were a big inspiration for the director, and I know that she visited some and spent some time there. So women who are accused of witchcraft are often attacked by neighbours and by members of their community. And so because of this, these witch camps were set up in Ghana. And they are said to have existed for around 100 years, with one camp in the Gambaga township being established in the 1800s. So they've been around for a long time. So that shows how embedded accusations are. And in Ghana in particular, witchcraft is very embedded in culture. You know, it's very widespread, and belief is very widespread. So women in these camps are protected by a chief who runs the camp, which is what we see in the film. Mr. Banda is acting as the person who's like safeguarding these women and protecting them. And it keeping them safe from vigilantes, and in return they work for this chief, like we see in the film, either, you know, farm labouring or working in a quarry or whatever it is. So basically they work for this chief to earn this safe space for them to live in. So there are places that women can flee for safety, but I think obviously the camps themselves are not the best environment, which I'll talk about in a minute. But women in these camps are there for a variety of reasons, and quite often it's linked to mental illness, which is still not as widely understood and accepted in Ghana. So women who are displaying signs of mental illness are often accused of witchcraft, or it's because someone owes them a debt that they don't want to repay, so a way to get out of that is to accuse them of witchcraft. And really, sadly, a lot of widows end up in these camps because they're accused so that the late husband's property can be taken. So they're accused by family members. And once an accusation's been made, that forfeits any right to property and to, you know, which is so fucking horrible.
Yeah, it really is, yeah.
You know, it's so awful. And the government is making efforts to close the camps and to reintegrate residents back into the communities, but they do still exist. And there are criticisms from people who are on the ground actually working with these women and in communities around this just blanket attempt to close these camps, because most women are never reintegrated back into the community.
No, I was going to say, presumably it's more dangerous for them to try to be reintegrated. You know, they're going to face so much violence if that's the case. Yeah.
So they end up with no home to go back to and nowhere to be if camps are closed. And so what these, you know, charities and groups that work with these women argue is that the real problem's not the camps, it's the prevalence and negative consequences of allegations. And so actually what needs to be done is a real a culture shift away from violence being the result of accusations of witchcraft. And also, I would say, understanding about mental illness and you know, again, this sort of patriarchy that if women are standing to inherit, that, you know, if someone makes an allegation, suddenly they've got no rights to claim what's theirs. I think that's the bigger problem, is the way that these allegations are being used for personal gain. So that's what needs to be addressed, rather than just closing these camps and leaving these women with nowhere to go.
Yeah.
But in terms of prevalence, so in 2012, there were at least 6 camps in Ghana that were holding around 1,000 women. By 2015, the government had shut down several of these camps. And in 2020, there were 4 camps holding around 500 people. So they're affected by a big lack of resource. There's no electricity, no running water, just a general lack of you know, sustainability. Most of the residents are elderly women who can't work, and they're abandoned there by family members, so they rely on charity donations. In 2023, a bill was introduced that criminalised the practice of accusing or labelling people as witches, but as of 2024, it's not yet been enacted. But this came on the back of the murder of a 90-year-old woman called Akudente in 2020, who was accused of being a witch by a priestess and was dragged by a mob before being lynched. So this is not something, I think a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about on this podcast is being that historical context. And that's part of why we feel free in the West to reclaim the witch as a label, because, you know, the witch trials are, although we're still facing the same misogyny and patriarchy and things that drove the witch trials, we don't have to live in fear that if someone accuses us that we'll be murdered.
Exactly, yeah. That belief system has kind of moved on, yeah.
But, you know, even up to 2023, this is still a problem in Ghana and in other countries as well, not just in Africa, you know, in other countries around the world. But, so I think just a point I wanted to finish on is that witchcraft beliefs and accusations are huge and multifaceted, and I think we need to avoid viewing it from this Western colonialist perspective and understand that these beliefs serve a purpose both historically and in modern contexts. And these, you know, we need to consider these various factors like healthcare, wider socioeconomic issues, what purpose these serve. And these are tied to these issues with infrastructure that are still directly related to colonialism. And those who are working in communities are very critical of approaches from Western organisations, charities, and things like. So there's long been a perspective that witchcraft allegations serve an important function in anthropological terms, and people who are actually working with these communities are very critical of this perspective that the UN and other international agencies have taken, because they're saying that this is a really harmful belief to suggest that it serves a purpose for people to be accused and to face this violence. And they argue that because this is impacting non-Western people, and so globally there's an indifference to it, and because it impacts on those who are routinely discarded in society, so the very young and the very old, that it serves, again, it's that looking away, it's sort of a justification for not doing more by suggesting that it serves a purpose and it's not for us to intervene. But actually it's not serving a purpose in terms of it might be fulfilling a need in terms of a gap that's there in infrastructure and in socioeconomic factors, but to suggest that then we just need to sort of leave it alone.
It's incredibly rich as well to say, you know, it's not for us to, it's, you know, leave it alone. We kind of like, but didn't care about, you know, getting involved in every other aspect, but somehow something that, you know, I just find it, you know, it's really just gobsmacked actually that you know that perspective it seems incredibly crude.
It is very crude. It's a very crude and very self-serving perspective to be saying it's not our job to get involved in this because it matters to this culture, but you weren't bothered about destroying a culture under colonialism.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know why I'm saying that. You know, I'm shocked by this. So it's colonialism 101. Isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, but that's, I mean, very grim, but I think very important to see that. And I think for this series as well, for us to be talking about the ways that the figure of the witch, and we've said it, you know, multiple times, is a man-made monster. We are lucky to be able to reclaim the aspects of that we find powerful. In the West, but the threat of it and the danger of it still remains, and women are still being targeted and harmed because of, you know, these fears and these beliefs. And I think that's really important, and that's why films like this are so important to talk about, because, you know, as much as I love like The Craft, seeing, you know, some middle-class girls playing light as a feather, stiff as a board in the bedroom is one thing. But, hearing about the way that elderly women in this example in Ghana are being, like, kicked out of their homes and abandoned and ostracised and left to work and toil and, you know, we no access to resources because someone has the power to say you're a witch and my word stands and
exactly.
Yours don't, is something that we all need to be aware of, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, that was extremely sobering in terms of, Folklore Corner, but no, but super, informative and really useful. And, it kind of also, and, just to reflect what you've just said, that, in terms of the figure of the witch is very multifaceted. And I think all this film that we've covered, they all have a place in in debate, but I think it was incredible, incredibly useful to finish on this film as well, and to kind of bring it all back to to the present day, and also make it, and not necessarily make it a them problem. That should be kind of like, it isn't a case of being kind of like, oh, that it happens there. It should be all of all. It's a feminist issue.
It's a feminist issue, and it's a part of violence. I think there's all these strategies about violence against women and girls globally, but this is an aspect that you just don't really see talked about, or when you do, exactly. it's like a curiosity story.
Exactly, that's it. Yeah.
It's not given the gravitas I don't think that it deserves, and the respect it deserves, because as I say, and I hope that I've portrayed that my approach to this is not to say that these people are wrong to believe what they believe, or that these beliefs are.
Not at all.
But that's not what I'm trying to say. I think what I am trying to say is that we as a world, particularly us in the West, who are directly responsible for the ongoing issues in places like Ghana and because of colonialism, don't get to turn away when it's hard to deal with,
when it's convenient for us. Exactly. But and also he highlights how important it is to have these stories told by the right people, just like Bulbul, as the in the previous episode, it's very important to have those voices coming through, the stories being told, but being told by by the right people and from the right perspective, and with the right message at its heart. So
absolutely. Watch it, everybody. Watch the film.
Watch the film, exactly.
Well, I mean, recommendations-wise, have you got any recommendations?
I've got quite a lot, actually. Oh! And I really went, but again, just like this film is not a horror film, the recommendations I have are not necessarily horror, but like more, leaning towards social horror, social commentary, satirical critiques. So my first one is The Lobster by Yorgos Lanthimos, which, again, has a very satirical approach to societal norm, a dark humor, that absurdity that that we find in I Am Not a Witch. So I think that kind of like makes a good companion piece for this one. Tangerine from 2015 by Sean Baker, about a transgender sex worker who discover her boyfriend pimp has been cheating on her, so it like doesn't scream necessarily companion piece for I Am Not a Witch, but it's kind of like a really fresh and authentic perspective on marginalized individuals and societal expectations again. Rafiki from 2018 from the director Wanuri Kahui. It's a love story between two young women in Kenya who struggle against societal norms and expectations. There's like definitely a recurrent theme in my in my recommendations there. But this fresh perspective and those fresh voices, I think kind of coming out of Africa as well. I think it's important to have those films coming out. Atlantics from Matt Diop from 2019. Again, not a horror film, but blend of realism and supernatural elements in that film. Kind of similar in the themes and the story. And my last recommendation is Wadja from 2012, about a young girls who struggle against societal norm in Saudi Arabia. It's absolutely beautiful film. So no horror recommendations from me this week, but all films that I think have a lot to say in terms of societal horror in that sphere. So what about you?
Well, I've just thought of some while you were talking, because I'd just got a couple of documentaries about... so one, The Witches of Gambaga, is a documentary about the witch camps in Ghana. And then Storyville on BBC did a really interesting documentary about witchcraft in Africa and its impacts. But when you were saying about films and these perspectives, what came to my mind was, anything by Jordan Peele, because I think he's really good at telling these stories, and again from a perspective, a lived reality. And then I was thinking about Candyman by Nia DaCosta, that I think, that does that story of alienation and the impact of racism and the long-term impacts on society. And then I was thinking about A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night as well.
Yes.
Which I really like. I think, I'm sure we'll end up covering it at some point on the podcast. But, that, again, in it looks at, a modern context, but the ways that, I suppose misogyny and patriarchy are timeless, aren't they? Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But looking at the way, how it feels to live under that system, that oppressive sort of regime. And also, I would say Holy Spider, which...
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, great.
That, I think, is a brilliant example of, again, that the real world impact, because it's based on a true story. It's something I'm going to rewatch, actually. I went to cinema to see it when it came out, and I was so blown away by it, but it's also so difficult. So difficult to watch, but important to watch as well. And so I would say, if people are interested in films that are looking at, are taking the sort of reality of a lot of women's lives, Holy Spider is a good one, if an infuriating and at times very painful one to watch. So yes, they would be my recommendations. Yeah, so what a grim list we have today. But all important. Yeah. So it's been fantastic. I can't believe this is already the end of this season. I mean, that's obviously, there's so many more films, dealing with the witch that we could have covered. Yeah. That we still might. There might be some little bonus episodes. Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Look out for a bonus episode. Most probably practical magic. Most probably practical magic. Yeah. But it's been amazing, and I think the films that we chose for this series really did, give a global perspective as well on the witch, and it was brilliant, and as usual, all the amount of research that you do for each episode blows me away, and it's been so informative and just such a joy as usual to talk to you about all these things. Oh, I know, I feel the same. Oh, I know. I know, I feel like I'll be saying goodbye. Fear not, we will be back, pretty much as soon as this episode is out. Yeah. But still, miss us till we come back, everybody. Exactly, yeah. Thanks for listening to Monstrous Flesh. Please join us next time for more discussion about women in horror. You can find out more about us via our website, monstrousflesh.co.uk, where you can access our research for each episode, buy our wonderful merch, and see our upcoming events. We'd love to hear from you, either via our email or social media channels, and also please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and help us spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. And until next time, creepy and weird, everyone.